Today, we are going to tell you everything that you need to know about preparing for media interviews. We were doing some lockdown learning during the pandemic, and we looked at presentation skills and media training skills. And during that time, I was chatting to Wesley Smith and also to Gillian Kelly. And we had some brilliant feedback and some great chats. And we also talked to the one and only Gary Burgess. And Gary, the feedback that we've had is actually that people wanted us to get into more detail and do a bit of a deeper dive. So I thought that's what we'd do today. And thanks for coming along.
It's great to be here. And we've gone from lockdown to unlock. So let's unlock some of these subjects and talk about it.
I like that. Yeah, no, I love that. And do you know what I really love as well is the fact that we are able to be in the same room together, albeit a metre apart, which is the rules where we are. I know everyone's got different rules, haven't they? So first of all, really what we were talking about is, I think, let's put ourselves in the position of someone who's been told, you are going to be doing a media interview and you have to go and do that. And then they go, ugh. What next? And I think there's a number of things that people can put in place to prepare, to feel ready. So what would be kind of your top tip, maybe your first piece of advice that you would give as that information is delivered to them?
I'd think stop and don't panic, because it can instantly feel like a rabbit in the headlights moment. You can almost feel your body tensing up. You've suddenly been told you have to do this and it feels like a burden. Actually, let those shoulders down, let that moment digest and realize, no, if you play this right, it's actually a really big opportunity. You have an opportunity to use somebody else's platform, whether that's TV or radio or newspaper or online or a combination of them all often these days, to get across your key messages and even get across some of your own brand values by the way you appear, by the way you talk, by the way that you show you know your stuff. There are so many opportunities there, but it's perfectly understandable at first. You think, oh my word, what am I going to do? Relax.
It's such a good point that you make there, and one that I talk about a lot when I'm training people, because they feel when they're asked to do a media interview, that they are going to have to answer all of the questions of the journalist, and that's what they're going in with. Oh my gosh, the journalist is going to try and catch me out. The journalist is going to ask me this, that, and the other, and what am I going to say? And actually what they need to think is, this is an opportunity. And like you've just said, this is an opportunity to say what I would like to get across. So I think that's the really good starting point of thinking, right, what would I like to say in this media interview? And actually get that down on some paper. And I think often people will say, I'm too busy, I haven't got time to do that. But actually you need to take some time, right? Just to think, right, what is my main message? What do I want to say? And how am I going to do that in a succinct way? What is my overarching message? You know, why am I saying that? Maybe an example or an analogy, some statistic, figures you've mentioned before, really great in the middle. And then that concluding thought. And as you start to put it in that kind of package, you think, oh yeah, okay, actually, I can start to build my messages out here and then be thinking about how I might bridge to those during the interview and during that opportunity.
Absolutely. And there are never enough hours in the day. And so I think some people think this takes hours and hours and hours of homework. Actually, it might be the drive or the walk or the cycle to the office. Just let your mind drift away to some of these things. And finding what you want to say can feel quite difficult. The way I think of it is, whatever that story is that you are talking about, always think, how does that affect real people? So it's sometimes less about what you're announcing. If you focus more on how does your announcement affect people, those people may be your customers, it may be somebody else. But if you think about it in those terms, and then take yourself to the pub or to the coffee shop in your mind, sitting down with your best friend over that latte or that pint, how would you tell them that story? And that's probably as good as you are going to get with your crafted soundbite. It sounds highfalutin, a crafted soundbite and messaging. It's telling your mate in plain English what's really going on. That's what will connect with people. And actually, the journalist will appreciate that, because the journalist just wants clarity to help their audience understand the story.
Yeah, it's making it real, isn't it? It's being authentic as well. Often people will say to me, oh, well, I've got to use all these big, long words and everything. It's no, strip all of that back. You need to be talking in the way that you talk in a really authentic way. And Communication teams are brilliant and marketing teams, and I think it's great to plug into those. But at the same time, I think people can get really bogged down in, I need to get this in and this in and this in. So it's a balance, isn't it? It's great to prep, to have all of that, to make sure that you get that great brand message in. But at the same time, it's thinking about, what's the story here? What's going to interest people? What are they going to grab hold of?
Absolutely. It might be your annual report is out and there are 300 pages of statistics there. Well, the annual report is interesting to the people who want to read the annual report. But let's be really honest. Most normal people, and maybe even most people inside the company, are not going to read that annual report, even though it needs to exist. But within there, it might be, for example, did you know the number of people who've been using our online platform to do their shopping has doubled during lockdown? Did you know that actually there are more women than men now using this particular product that there weren't before? Suddenly it becomes real. Did you know that somebody locked down, isolated, suddenly was able to connect with the world and relatives they'd not seen for years because they were using our brand new piece of technology? It's no longer a tech story about a piece of software or hardware. This is about a product that's connected people around the world. Again, seeing it through the eyes of the end user can sometimes be a really helpful way of turning a dry spreadsheet, a page of numbers that's a blizzard of stats, into something that's real, that people actually care about. And that's the bottom line. Do I care about what you're saying?
Okay, so we've thought about our message. We've thought about how we're going to deliver that. Anything else do you think we can do at this moment? So before we're going to go on and do this media interview, is it worth, would you say, practicing? I mean, I say to people, it's probably a really good idea to maybe get a friend or something to throw the questions to you and just to have a go back, if you've got time. What do you think?
I think it's really valuable to be able to do that. People can't always do that either because they haven't got the time or the people aren't there. So if you've got the opportunity, use it, absolutely. But if your practice is in the shower while you're getting ready, if it's while you're putting your makeup on, while you're probably not brushing your teeth, while you're driving in the car, you might look a bit silly to passing motorists, but who cares? You could just claim you were singing to a song on the radio. Practice some of those thoughts. But while you're doing it as well, just take your mind into the head of the journalist who's about to interview you. If you were that journalist, what would you be asking you? And it's a really helpful way then of preempting what you may be asked, because there will be some obvious questions, but just by thinking through that, you might think, actually, they may ask me about X or Y or Z. And that's not a problem because you've thought about that in advance.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also preparing, depending on the subject matter, depending on who you are and what you're talking about. But it may be that there could be some challenging questions coming your way, right? So it's really good to prepare for those in advance as well and think, where could I potentially get caught out here? Where could I be taking on a bit of a tangent that I don't want to? Or maybe even what's the news agenda? Depending on what's in the news that day, that could end up becoming the story that the journalist wants to, get from you. So you need to think, okay, I should prepare for that.
Absolutely. There are many fancy words I've heard used in media training about bridging and helicoptering. I tend to think of it as zooming in or zooming out. It's as simple as that. So if somebody's
very on theme at this time with Zoom.
It's all about Zoom. If somebody's asking you something very, very specific and it's not very comfortable to get into the specifics either because it's not your area of expertise or frankly, it's just something where you don't really want to go there, well, start there. But zoom out onto the broader issue with your answer. Likewise, if a journalist asks you a question so broad and abstract about a current theme, and you're not an expert on that big picture, start there and zoom in with your answer to show off a bit of your own expertise with your answer. There are ways of getting there without tripping yourself up, and also without looking like you're evading the answer or avoiding those questions, because that in turn can say something about you that you may not be intending.
Yeah, that's very true. You've got to be careful and also not to take the journalist on a tangent. I mean, this is actually during the interview rather than preparing. But so often people will say things and then suddenly they're down, an area, a corridor, this dark kind of alley of thinking, how the heck did I get there? But actually they've offered it. So maybe giving some thought in advance to think, well, where do I not want to go? and making sure that you're not going to do that either.
Absolutely. Rabbit holes happen. I know in most conversations with my mates, in fact, I've done it with you earlier today, we're chatting about X, Y, and Z. And before you know it, we're over there talking about something else. That's great with your mates. But if you are in an interview, stay roughly on topic. It might be the journalist is taking you somewhere else that suits you. That's fine. But as long as you're clear in your own mind where you're wanting to go in the first place, and exactly as you said, where you don't want to go, knowing that is equally important, then you can just nudge things back to where you want to be. Or at the very least, give yourself some thinking time because you can see what's coming.
Something I'd say that is really, really important is knowing, not just thinking. And we were chatting about this earlier, weren't we? And there's many people that have got themselves into quite a lot of trouble. Some that have been very famous, moments like Diane Abbott we were chatting about earlier. And, there's plenty of people that have made the mistake, but they don't go armed with the right information. They haven't got the stats and facts in front of them. And if you haven't got them, then don't try and go there, right? Don't make it up. Don't do it.
Don't make it up, particularly if it is something around numbers. You will just tie yourself in knots. And you mentioned one, but there are many such similar examples. Don't guess it. There is no harm in saying, do you know, that is a really good question. And actually, the answer is so important, I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah. I will get you that information because I want your listeners or viewers or readers to have absolute clarity. That's a perfectly legitimate answer because how can any journalist argue with you for not wanting to make it up on the spot? However, as soon as you start guessing, a guess layered with a guess, layered with a guess
is a mess.
There you go. There's a car sticker if ever I heard one. It really is.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so we've done a bit of prep, we've done a bit of practice. So now I think let's just think about those papers because lots of people, I'm sure you've had this too, have come into the studio and they've now got all of this prep in front of them and they probably may be over prepared, but we don't want papers, do we? We actually want people to talk from the heart and to talk authentically and in a real way and in an engaging way rather than thinking I need all these notes in front of me. They can be a real barrier actually.
I promise you, you don't need them. I know you think you need them. I know you think coming with half a dozen lever arch files will solve the problem. It really won't. You will look like the UK Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions finding the right tab. You do not need that. That becomes actually a physical barrier to your interview. You might want a little sheet of your key points, particularly if there are some numbers or facts that you want there. But the very act of actually, personally for me, the very act of just writing them down actually, often it lodges in your brain without you realizing just by you handwriting them or typing them. So you know more than you think. So don't over worry about that. And if you are more focused on trying to find the facts than focusing on what's coming out of your mouth, you're actually more likely to make a mistake by having this mountain of information there in front of you instead of a bit of preparation, a comfort blanket of knowing you have a few notes there if you need them, but you often don't even need that actually. And then just focus on what you're saying and focus on what you don't want to say as well.
Yes, that is very important. What you said in a session that we did with Wes that you really do believe in media training. Why do you believe in it, Gary?
It's really interesting. There are people who cock an eyebrow when they hear a journalist saying they are a fan of media training. Those people don't understand what good media training is about. Good media training is not teaching people to give non-answers, to repeat the same single soundbite regardless of the answer, to in effect turn into an automatron. And we've seen a number of global politicians do that because they think only the answer is going to be used. Well, increasingly, journalists will play the full footage, particularly on social media, and show them up to the idiotic performance that it was. For me, good media training is a win-win. Just as a journalist gets training to be a journalist, media training is not much more different than that. Everybody wants something good out of it. It is mutually beneficial. I, as a journalist, want to ask my questions, and they are my questions. I'm not having anybody else tell me what to say, but I genuinely want you to give a good answer because I only want you to do well in terms of giving me the information I need that helps me tell my story. Seeing you stumble doesn't help me. I'm not there as a gotcha. It's not the case that that's what journalists are doing at the start of this. If gotchas happen, gotchas happen. But no, I'm on a fact-finding mission. So knowing you're armed with facts and that you can translate those into a human speak form of answer is always a win-win. And I'll keep coming back to you for more if you're good at it.
Doorstep interviews, Gary. I think it's really good to have a chat about these because people would say, well, how on earth do I prepare for one of those? You know, the media turn up at your office or wherever it may be on a pavement and there you are. I've seen it during lockdown with Dominic Cummings and suddenly all of the media are there. There is a way, though, to prepare for that, isn't there, in advance? I mean, I would say, or we say in our training, that actually having some core messages, being aware in advance of a potential story that's brewing, thinking how you're going to handle that and doing a little bit of practice with that as well really helps. Because what you don't want to do is be caught out, start talking about things that you don't want to say, start to sidestep. I mean, someone told me that someone they knew, the press were there, the camera was in front of them and they just started to sidestep and like edge out of frame as if they could escape. Other people, I've seen them, they've run away. And during media training as well, I've had that where people are like, oh, I'm not doing this. And then they run away. It's like, no, that's not an option. So how would you say that people can prepare for that moment that could come?
Right, where's the camera? There's the camera. No comment. I'm sorry. No. I can't speak. This is ridiculous. No, I'm not speaking. No, go away. No. What you've just done there, aside of looking pretty silly and ill-prepared, is you've given a journalist some brilliant footage.
And that's going to be the lead, right? That's going to be at the very start of that report.
Regardless of what the story of the day is involving you, the story is you looking like you are trying to get away. Why are they trying to get away? What have they got to hide? What truth are they not telling us? Suddenly becomes the unwritten story through your own actions. Don't do that, for goodness sake. You might think that, or your instinct might be to do that. I wouldn't like a camera in my face if I've just opened my front door or my office door and I've barely had my first cup of coffee. The reality is you need to spectacularly underreact at that point. Again, shoulders down, think calm. It might be you've not got much to say at that point, but you can say that. You can say, thank you for your questions. This is a really important day. These issues, I'm so glad you're asking the questions about these issues because I want the answers as well. Do you know what? I'm going to go and get the facts because it wouldn't help anyone to speculate right now. Let me get that information. I will sit down with you for that interview.
Yeah, that's good.
You've just taken the sting out of the situation. The journalist still has something in the meantime because the news machine is a hungry machine.
It is.
But what it now has is you being reasonable, saying you will go and try to find out, instead of that with hand in the camera. Either is going to get used, but which one do you want to see on the TV or hear on the radio that day, or that photo on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper? So just calm it down. And if you can begin with a simple piece of empathy, depending on what the story is, show some empathy. Be human. If something bad has happened, I'm really sorry this has happened. I'm going to go and investigate and get all the details. I will let you know as soon as I know. I'm as shocked as you are about this. That might be relevant. As long as that's not painting you into a corner that you're going to regret later, if that feels legitimate to say it. People will appreciate you being human.
Depending on people's personality type, depending on how they respond to things, it's this fight or flight mode that people go into, isn't it? And I've seen a whole range of reactions and emotions actually to that kind of experience. And some people will get very defensive and try and fight back. And they're not trying to do that in a bad way, but it's thinking about, well, how is that coming across on camera? Now, how is that going to be perceived by a viewer? And equally, like we talked about that running away or, that panicked look. And of course it is a moment that I think would be horrible and high pressure. And don't get me wrong, I think even if it happened to us right now, you think, oh, right, hang on a second. It's just taking a breath. And we say that a lot in all of the training that we give for various reasons. Just take that breath, think in that moment, okay, let's not panic here. The cameras are rolling. And I think that's where people forget is that the camera is always rolling. The mic is always on. I mean, you just look at, it's a matter of weeks ago now, but the journalist, the CNN journalist who arrested, and I mean, it was shocking. And as a journalist as well, I was just, I was furious and so angry about that situation. But it was bizarre that they didn't think that that live feed was going back to the studio and that camera was rolling the whole time whilst they were being arrested, and then when it was put on the ground.
cameras are just always live, and you can't tell because they're not attached to big trucks anymore. You may be connected to a TV network. You may be connected to Facebook Live.
Yes,
you may be connected
exactly.
to Instagram TV. You may be connected to Periscope on Twitter. It could be going anywhere at any time. We might be live right now for all we know, so we just need to be aware of that, Hannah. But it is important to remember that. For me, regardless of what you think of the individual, one of the masters of this is Sir Richard Branson. Many years ago, there was a train crash in Cumbria involving Virgin Trains, and it had just happened. It was clearly bad, but nobody knew any details. Nobody knew what had caused it, the true scale of what the effect of that in terms of injuries or fatalities. But actually, the first person to arrive in front of the cameras was Sir Richard Branson. He had nothing to say at that stage. He stood there on the scene of a train crash and said, "I'm horrified. I can't believe what I'm seeing. This is just awful. We will move mountains to find answers. We will do whatever we need to for our staff, for passengers, for anybody. I'm here. Just use me for whatever's needed. We'll go and find out." That is really smart. He's not hiding anything, and there may have been nothing to hide anyway.
But he could have hid in that
Completely.
moment and just thought, I can't deal with this. We'll come out with our proper statement later. But it's that was needed.
He just showed some human. And you cannot underestimate the power of that. People by people, connections matter. And just being there, fronting it, and being on the side of the people affected, and being on the side of the people watching on the national news, everyone's reaction was the same, which is, oh my good God, this is awful. There are so many whys and whats and wherefores, but this is just awful. He stood there and said that. He's suddenly on our side. That, I mean, to sound cynical to say that's really smart, but it is just smart because you are instantly on the side of the people watching this story rather than the mysterious corporate head hiding away in their ivory tower.
I don't think, I know, and I believe that that's more important than ever. We are in such a changed landscape to what we were. And the world looked very different 15, 20 years ago. Now, like you say, social media has changed that. People just don't take all of that rubbish anymore. They can see that fake kind of veneer. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be real. It needs to be, like you say, it's the human face, isn't it? In all of this. That's just so, so important, more important than ever before. And that's what people are looking for.
I think absolutely right, particularly because whatever the initial reaction is, regardless of the professional TV crews or whatever else, there will be someone there with a mobile phone filming it. Yeah. It will get
Everyone's a journalist.
Everyone's a journalist. Everyone has a TV, radio, online newspaper station in their back pocket these days. It's quite extraordinary when you think of it like that. So whatever your initial reaction is, will get seen. So make sure it's the right initial reaction. And that initial reaction should be human.
Something that you have done a lot of.
Where's this going?
I know. Could be going anywhere, Gary. Is radio.
Yep.
And I wouldn't mind chatting about that for a bit because I think that's a little bit different to television. Well, first of all, there aren't cameras there, although there are cameras everywhere these days and even in radio studios. But I'd say it's a little bit different in terms of maybe how much you can talk, how much you can expand your answers, and how you might prep slightly differently for that than television. Now, of course, with a TV situation, if you're live, you might know that you've got a live interview that's going to last a couple of minutes, and that's all going to be seen. But often you're just doing a pre-recorded interview and you're thinking, right, I really need to talk succinctly here and get these sound bites in. Yeah. But actually with radio, I think you can just be a little bit more relaxed. Would you say that?
Yeah, radio is a hungrier machine. So radio itself needs more content. On a speech radio station, on a speech breakfast show, it may be looking for 180 minutes worth of sound every morning. And that sound is interviews, is conversations, sometimes is listener phone-ins, for example. But it means whereas on a live television interview may only be 2 minutes, a pre-recorded television soundbite might be 17 seconds. A 8:10 in the morning flagship radio live interview may be 5 minutes. If it's juicy, it may get to 10, it may get to 15 minutes. And if it's a more feature-based interview, perhaps usually during the mid-morning daytime show, it could be half an hour. So there is real room to expand. But yes, there is also real room to find yourself in a hole making mistakes. So don't over worry about that, but do be aware of that and just think, what are the stories you're going to tell? How are you going to tell it? And if you do have other stories and anecdotes to contextualize what you are saying, so it's not just our new product achieve X, Y, and Z. If you know customer Marjorie somewhere did X, Y, and Z, you might have the room to bring in that story as well, just to bring what you're saying to life. So there are greater opportunities there as well.
Lots of people say, well, I'd rather do a radio interview on the phone. Of course, that's where we've been really during the pandemic. But really, when the world finds its, new order again, and we are able to do this, we've said it in our chats before, but it really is great to get into the studio, isn't it? Even though you might think that that's scarier or inconvenient, actually, there's nothing like being in the studio with the journalist, with the presenter, and having that chat, because actually it's more relaxing than sitting on the end of a phone.
I find, we are doing this, I find once I put the big light on and on the telephone, I find it quite an unnatural experience. So you're not necessarily on your guard, but you just aren't relaxing into the conversation because you are on the telephone talking to silence while you're talking. Because in the studio, you've got the advantages now. I'm seeing your reaction as we're talking. I'm getting lots of unspoken clues from you about whether you're engaging in what I'm saying, about whether you're liking what I'm saying. And
or whether I'm about to nod off.
Or if I've misspoken, I might see your eyes widen slightly. So I've got a little bit of a clue that there might be an awkward question coming. So there are some advantages. But also, it is just that human connection thing. That conversation is less of an interview and more of a conversation. And the best interviews are conversations. It's good for the listener, but it's also good for the journalist as well, because you develop that rapport and flow, and everyone gets more out of that situation. So if you do have the opportunity to be there face to face, take it. It might be 10 minutes out of your day. It might be a mild inconvenience. I promise it will pay dividends.
And also on the telephone, of course, you could be between meetings, rushing around, trying to take it on the street, all the noise around you. You can't really hear the journalist. That's just going to actually become high pressure. And certainly if there comes a very difficult question, you're very much on the spot and thinking, my goodness, you can feel quite out of control. So I would say if you're going to have that kind of interview, it has to be on the phone. Take yourself somewhere where you can be in control, in peace and quiet, and also maybe have a few notes in front of you. Again, not, reams that you're going to read, but just maybe the facts and figures to hand and a couple of ideas and bullet points.
Completely. Somewhere quiet, somewhere calm. And very often radio stations, well, I think we've all learned a bit more about this during lockdown of using video conferencing. But radio stations will, if you ask them, could we use FaceTime audio or Skype audio or even through Zoom just to take the audio? It's a shade better quality than telephone. And that will help. But nothing beats being face-to-face because it's just easier all round. And I find every time the person doing the talking gives a more authentic performance because they're able just to be the version of them that they want to project to the world. It is easier when you've got someone to bounce off because we do it quite instinctively, even you and me.
And just before an interview, and people ask me this all the time, is there such a thing as off the record? Do I need to be careful of what I say right from the beginning? The answer to that is yes. Be very careful what you say as soon as you're there. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there can be an off the record. You have to be very, very careful about that, don't you?
I think people have got to be clear of what the rules of engagement are. The easiest starting point is just to remind yourself, just as we're told in this new world, it's easier to assume everyone around you has got coronavirus, so you instinctively keep a sensible distance and good hygiene. Likewise, with a journalist, just assume everything you're saying could appear in the public domain. That is a sensible starting point. Now, there may be formal, off-the-record conversations, there may be background briefings you have, but in reality, just think everything I'm saying will appear out there. It may not be attributed to me, it might be that it's said off the record and comes from a source, but if you have that starting point of only say what you want to say, of course make small talk, of course talk about what you're doing at the weekend, but if your story is about job cuts, you may not want to be saying you're going out on your millionaire Playboy yacht with your friends around the Med at the weekend because it's just not a good look. Don't be an idiot. And I think we all do that automatically. but it's just reminding yourself, how's this going to look?
It's about having that relationship really with the journalist. And if you haven't got that, you don't want to be saying anything off the record, anything that could get you into trouble. And people do. People, it can feel very, very chatty before an interview, can't it? Very comfortable before you're on. But the journalist is thinking about that and taking that information on and then thinking, oh, actually, there's a story here and I need to ask about that. And they do have to ask about that because that's their job.
Always. And the journalist is just doing their job. And I've had so many of those occasions over the years where the preamble, perhaps the 8 o'clock news bulletin is on and my interviewee is the 8:10. They've just come to sit down, but we can have a little natter because the news is happening. And we might be chatting about whatever we're here to talk about. But just out of general interest, I'll send the conversation in other directions, not to catch them out, just to almost set the tone for the morning, put someone at their ease. But sometimes someone will over-offer. It's like, oh, yes, job losses, I know, and today's just the start of it. You wait till you hear next week's real announcement. I have to do something with that information. Yeah. I have a duty of care to my listeners at that point if I know that information. So just be aware of that. Most people are. So you don't have to be terrified about it. It just happens instinctively. But if you're not the sort of person who's thought that through, engage brain, and perhaps just say a little less beforehand.
And as journalists, we are really wanting to ask the questions that we feel that everyone wants asked. That's the thing. And that takes us right back to the beginning of this chat, really, when we were saying, well, have a think about, well, what might the journalist ask me? What do the public want to know about this? What is interesting, or what do I actually need to tell them that's really important information that I need to get straight, or the facts that I need to get straight here?
There are so many occasions where it's apparent to me the person being interviewed by me is quite surprised by the questions I'm asking, and sometimes quite taken aback that I'm not showing an absolute fascination in the fact that they've just invested £100,000 on a new piece of equipment in their factory. That was nice enough, but I might widen that conversation out or ask how that piece of equipment is affecting customers or affecting productivity and going in other directions that to me are perfectly legitimate, because my approach is always, what do the people watching, listening or reading want to know? Another way of thinking about it, if you're at home listening to it on the radio or watching it on the telly, what are you screaming at the radio or the TV?
Oh, I've done plenty of that lately.
Always.
My goodness.
Why are you not asking him about X, Y, and Z? Those for me are always the best questions, because journalists can sometimes get very carried away with long, elaborate, complicated questions to show off their own knowledge. Actually, a bit like during lockdown in one of the press conferences, I went, Minister, when are the pubs opening? And the minister was a bit shocked because they hadn't prepared for that question, because they were expecting lots of technical questions. I knew most people getting in touch with me wanted to know when the pubs were opening.
Absolutely right.
So why not ask that question? So again, thinking that through on the way into the studio, it doesn't need to be War and Peace. It could be part of the drive or walk or cycle there. It could be while you're sitting in reception having a cup of coffee. It doesn't take a long time, but just, right, today's story is about X, Y, and Z. What are they likely to ask me?
And actually, social media can be quite a good thermometer for that. If a story is starting to gain traction, you could actually tap into that, and rather than getting irate and angry at what people are saying, which sometimes is awful, and people can be awful, but it's just getting a little bit of an idea, oh, what's going on here? How do I need to respond? Might the journalist ask me those questions? And I think actually during the pandemic and during lockdown and during the press conferences, that's what you were doing as well. You were like, oh, right, there's a real theme coming out here. And we need to be, as journalists, the voice of the people. Completely.
It's about taking the temperature, taking the mood of the people in the room or not in the room in recent months. It's also, I'm a big believer as a journalist on my side of the fence, but it equally applies to the person being interviewed. Turn your weakness into your strength. What do I mean by that? So if all the people are having a go at you about something, own that moment. Do you know what? I'm fully aware right now, customers are really frustrated that this 3-day delivery is currently taking 6 days. Do you know, if I was them and I'd ordered, I think this is not good enough. Well, I'm with my customers on this, and this is why today I am doing da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You've just taken the sting out of the situation. That weakness has just become your strength. There's real power in doing that.
You show that you really care. And that's what people want ultimately.
It really is. Be human, speak human, act human. It makes a world of difference.
I think finally for today, I would like to talk about the pause. We've talked about this before, and just taking that breath, and there's so many things that are important with pauses, but pauses can catch people out, can't they? So where have you maybe experienced this, or what would your advice be around, people being left hanging and maybe filling the gap? I'm not going to fill it. I just did.
Aren't pauses horrible?
Yeah.
We are hardwired to not like pauses, because they're not pauses. They are gaping noises of silence. They are so unnatural. For example, if in the middle of an answer, I just paused for 3 seconds, that felt you could drive a double-decker bus through that gap.
Isn't
it's
it?
horrible.
Yeah. Certainly when the cameras are rolling, then the lights are on. Yeah.
Absolutely. But let that pause be your friend at the start. If you've just asked me a question, you do not have to dive straight in with the answer. Give yourself, I call it a heartbeat. Give yourself a heartbeat before you answer. So you've asked me the question. Well, it's a millisecond. It's amazing how much your brain can process.
But people so often just jump in, don't they?
And when they jump in, you then jump in back.
And then the energy rises. And then suddenly we've got this interview that's going 110 miles an hour. Our brain hasn't got time to think. And it's just thinking, then it starts to feel pressurized, right?
Until I slow it all back down again. No one in the history of the world has complained to a TV or radio station about someone talking too slowly, ever. It has never happened. However, on a daily basis, listeners and viewers ring up, mainly about the journalists for talking too quickly and interrupting people. So, slow it down. It is not a problem to take a pause before you answer. And when you've finished answering, if there is a silence there, leave that silence and let that silence be the problem of the person asking the questions.
100%. It's wise advice, because that is where people get caught out. And I think you're right. Even if the journalist is doing quick fire questions, and it is a technique of a journalist, is to pick up the pace, and people can feel under pressure more, and that temperature rises.
But why?
Exactly.
But why?
So you start to come back and defend, and it's dangerous territory. It really is. So however difficult it may be and challenging in that moment, actually you look better for it, for remaining in control. And actually the interviewer or presenter can actually look like they're actually being a bit out of order if they're pushing too hard, I would say as well, because I've seen that on the TV and I've got quite angry about that.
It's when there's a mismatch in what's going on.
Yeah.
A good conversation, a good interview, the tempo, the tone matches, and that works for everybody. If the person being interviewed is getting all irate, whilst the interviewer is very calmly going, but Minister, why did you ask them to resign? And they're getting irate. You can see what that's doing. But it also does work the other way. If the interviewer is getting more aggressive and you refuse to rise with it, it's only the interviewer who looks silly. So you just bide your time. You just hold your ground and just take your time and let the pause on the way in, but also the pause on the way out, be your friend. And let it be someone else's problem.
Well, talking of the pause, it's probably the right time to stop. I'm not sure quite how long that was, but we covered quite a lot.
Felt like 5 minutes. That's flown by.
It did feel like 5 minutes. I hope it did to you. But if there is anything that we haven't covered today that you'd like to share with us, any experiences, anything like that, put your comments in the comments box, and I would love to have another chat together soon. That would be good. Let's definitely do it. So be in touch with us. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for watching. And Gary and I will be back. But for now, pub.